Before everything fell apart, I believed I had a perfect life. My name is Daniel, and I had what many would consider the ideal marriage. My wife, Sophia, was not only beautiful but also intelligent and ambitious. We had been together for over a decade, and our life was filled with laughter, dreams, and plans for the future. We lived in a cozy house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a lush garden that Sophia tended to with the same care she devoted to our relationship. I remember the day we first met as if it were yesterday. It was at a local art gallery where I had gone to support a friend. Sophia stood across the room, her eyes shimmering with an infectious enthusiasm as she admired a painting. That spark drew me in, and before I knew it, we were sharing stories and laughter as if we had known each other for years. Our connection was instant, and it felt like fate. As the years went by, we built our lives together brick by brick. We traveled to places we had always dreamed of, shared countless dinners with friends, and even discussed starting a family. There was a time when I thought we were invincible, that nothing could tear us apart. But life has a way of throwing unexpected challenges our way, and sometimes the ones we trust the most can be the ones to betray us. It was during one of our trips to the countryside that I first heard about the vineyard owner, Marco. He was the epitome of charm, with a magnetic personality and a passion for winemaking that captivated everyone he met. The vineyard, a sprawling estate with rows of grapevines stretching toward the horizon, was known for producing some of the finest wines in the region. I remember visiting the place with Sophia, marveling at the beauty of the landscape and the artistry involved in the winemaking process. Marco was our host that day, and he had a way of making everyone feel special. As I watched him interact with Sophia, I felt a flicker of unease. He was attentive, charming, and had an undeniable charisma that made him the center of attention. I brushed it off, telling myself that it was just my imagination. After all, I trusted Sophia completely, or at least I thought I did. But as time went on, I began to notice subtle changes. Sophia would often mention Marco in passing, how he was hosting a wine tasting or how she admired his work ethic. I dismissed these comments, convincing myself that they were harmless. The thought of infidelity never crossed my mind. I believed we were in a solid relationship, built on love and trust. Little did I know that the seed of betrayal was already planted, and it would soon blossom into a nightmare that would shatter my world. As I reflect on those days, I realize how naive I was to think that love alone could protect us from the complexities of human desire. I was blissfully unaware, living in a bubble of happiness that would soon burst, revealing the harsh reality lurking beneath the surface. The calm before the storm was about to end, and I had no idea what was coming. The day I discovered Sophia's affair began like any other. I woke up to the smell of coffee wafting through the house, a scent that had always filled me with warmth and comfort. I could hear her humming softly in the kitchen, and I smiled, grateful for the routine we had built together. Little did I know that this seemingly ordinary day would turn into the catalyst for my unraveling. After breakfast, Sophia mentioned she was meeting some friends for lunch. I waved her off, assuring her that I'd be fine working on some projects at home. As she left, I noticed a slight hesitation in her voice, almost as if she was hiding something. I brushed it aside, attributing it to my overactive imagination. A few hours later, I received a phone call from an old friend, Mark, who was back in town. We hadn't seen each other in years, and he wanted to catch up. I agreed to meet him at a local cafe, eager to reconnect and take my mind off things. As I sat there, sipping my coffee and reminiscing about old times, Mark mentioned he had seen Sophia with Marco a few days earlier. My heart sank. He described a scene at the vineyard where they appeared far too close for comfort, laughing and sharing a bottle of wine, just the two of them. My mind raced, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark nodded, his expression serious. "I wouldn't bring it up if I were. I thought you should know." The world around me blurred as I processed the information. I felt as if I had been punched in the gut. The cafe, the chatter of patrons, the clinking of cups, everything faded into the background. All I could focus on was the gnawing feeling of betrayal curling in my stomach. After our conversation, I excused myself and stumbled out of the cafe, my mind racing with thoughts. How could this happen? Had I been blind to the signs? The doubt crept in and I felt like a fool for trusting her so completely. I drove home in a daze, my heart pounding in my chest. Upon entering the house, I was overwhelmed by a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief. I had never imagined that Sophia could betray me like this, especially with someone like Marco. I paced the living room, trying to find a way to rationalize it. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Mark was mistaken. But deep down, I knew the truth. When Sophia returned home, I confronted her, my voice trembling with a mix of hurt and rage. "Is it true?" I demanded, my heart racing. She froze, her eyes widening in shock, and for a moment I saw the facade slip. The guilt was evident and she stammered, trying to find the right words. Daniel, I can explain," she began, but I cut her off. I didn't want to hear excuses. I had seen enough. I felt the ground beneath me shift as I realized everything I had built with her was crumbling. The tears in her eyes only fueled my anger. "How could you do this to us?" I shouted, feeling the weight of betrayal suffocating me. The trust we had nurtured was shattered and I was left standing in the wreckage of our life together. As Sophia tried to reach for me to comfort me, I recoiled. I didn't want her touch. I didn't want her apologies. I felt lost, betrayed by the person I had loved the most. The emotional turmoil was too much to bear. I needed to escape, to think, to figure out what to do next. That night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy with pain. I couldn't shake the image of Sophia and Marco laughing together, sharing secrets that were meant for me. It was then that an idea began to form in my mind, a dark, vengeful thought that would soon consume me. I had been the loyal husband, the one who had stood by her side through thick and thin, and now I felt a burning desire for revenge. I wanted to make Marco pay for what he had done, for taking my wife and my happiness. I would not let this betrayal go unanswered. The days following my confrontation with Sophia were a blur of anger and heartache. I barely slept, consumed by thoughts of betrayal. Each passing moment felt like an eternity, and the only thing that seemed clear was my desire for revenge. I couldn't just sit back and let Marco continue to charm his way through life while I wallowed in pain. I needed to act. It began as a whisper in my mind, a notion that grew louder with each passing day. The idea of ruining Marco's reputation became an obsession. I would not only make him pay for what he had done to me, but also send a message to anyone who dared to betray another. I spent long hours contemplating the most effective way to execute my plan. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Marco's entire identity revolved around his vineyard. His charm, his wealth, his status in the community, they all hinged on the success of his wine business. If I could tarnish that, I would hit him where it hurt the most. But I had to be careful. I couldn't act recklessly and risk exposing my own involvement. I began to devise a plan, mapping out the steps I needed to take. First, I needed information. I had to gather intel on Marco, his business dealings, and the people he associated with. I reached out to acquaintances in the area, those who might have insights into the vineyard and its operations. A few conversations revealed whispers of discontent among his employees and some questionable practices that could be exploited. Next, I needed to consider my approach. I decided to spread rumors, the kind that would make people question Marco's integrity. It was essential to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of his customers and associates. I knew that gossip could spread like wildfire, especially in a small town where everyone was interconnected. I started by discreetly contacting a couple of local wine connoisseurs, people who held sway in the community. I fabricated stories about how Marco cut corners in his wine production, using inferior grapes and questionable fermentation practices. I painted a picture of a man willing to sacrifice quality for profit, a charlatan masquerading as a wine expert. "Have you heard what they say about Marco?" I would ask, feigning casual curiosity. The reactions were telling. Some nodded knowingly, while others expressed disbelief but seemed intrigued by the idea. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, and I knew I was making progress. My plan was to create a ripple effect, one that would reach the customers who frequented his vineyard. I envisioned them questioning their loyalty to Marco, wondering if they had been duped into believing he was a master vintner. The more people I could involve, the greater the impact. As I continued to spread rumors, I also made sure to keep an eye on Sophia. I wanted to see how she reacted to the news about Marco, if she showed any signs of guilt or remorse. She tried to reach out to me to apologize, but I was cold and distant, refusing to let her back into my heart. My heart was a fortress, and I had locked her out. The emotional turmoil within me was overwhelming. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and guilt as I watched my plan unfold. Part of me reveled in the thought of Marco's downfall, while another part whispered that I was becoming the very thing I despised. Was I any better than him? I pushed those thoughts aside, telling myself that this was about justice, about reclaiming my dignity. As the rumors began to gain traction, I felt a sense of power that I hadn't experienced in months. I was no longer the victim. I was taking control of my life. I could see the cracks forming in Marco's facade, and it thrilled me. I knew I was on the right path, and I was determined to see it through to the end. But deep down, I also worried about the consequences. What if I went too far? What if my actions had unintended repercussions that could hurt innocent people? It was a moral dilemma that gnawed at me, but the pain of betrayal overshadowed any doubts. I had to keep going. There was no turning back now. With each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I was ready to execute my plan, to watch as the vineyard owner's reputation crumbled. It was time to unleash the chaos I had created. With my plan in place, I felt a surge of adrenaline as I prepared to execute the next phase of my revenge. I had spent weeks laying the groundwork, and now it was time to watch the fruits of my labor take shape. The thrill of anticipation coursed through me, a dark satisfaction that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The first step was to amplify the rumors I had started. I reached out to a few more local influencers, bloggers, and social media personalities who had a penchant for wine and local businesses. I crafted elaborate stories about Marco's vineyard, emphasizing the supposed shortcuts he took and the poor quality of his wine. I made sure to present my claims as insider information to lend them credibility. Have you heard about Marco's vineyard? I've heard some troubling things, I would say casually, planting the seeds of doubt. It's shocking how much he's willing to compromise quality for profit. As expected, the gossip began to spread. I watched as conversations unfolded in coffee shops, on social media platforms, and even at local events. People were beginning to question the integrity of Marco's wine, and I could see the impact it had on his business. Customers who once flocked to his vineyard were now hesitant, their loyalty wavering. I also capitalized on local wine festivals and events where Marco was scheduled to showcase his wines. I made it a point to attend these events, mingling with other attendees and subtly steering conversations toward the rumors. I've heard some disturbing things about the quality of Marco's wine, I would say with faux concern, gauging the reactions of those around me. The more I spoke, the more I noticed people's expressions shift. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked skeptical but intrigued. It was a delicate dance, but I was getting better at it. Each time I planted a doubt in someone's mind, I felt a sense of triumph. But the emotional toll was heavy. I couldn't shake the nagging guilt that crept in during quiet moments. I was becoming the very monster I had set out to destroy. I reminded myself that this was about justice, that Marco had taken my wife and shattered my world. But as the rumors gained traction, I found it increasingly difficult to ignore the moral implications of my actions. One evening, after a particularly successful event where I had overheard whispers of doubt among attendees, I received a call from Mark. He had heard about the rumors and wanted to meet up. I agreed, eager to discuss the unfolding drama. As we sat at a bar, I couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and trepidation. "It's working," I said, my voice low. "People are starting to question him." Mark raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed but also concerned. "Just be careful, Daniel. You don't want to go too far. This could backfire." His words echoed in my mind, but I brushed them aside. I was in too deep now, and the thrill of revenge was intoxicating. I felt empowered, as if I were reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost in the wake of Sophia's betrayal. In the following weeks, I continued to stoke the flames of doubt surrounding Marco's vineyard. I reached out to a few disgruntled former employees of his, coaxing them into sharing their experiences. They recounted stories of poor working conditions and questionable practices, which I then strategically leaked to local media outlets. The narrative was taking shape, and I was orchestrating it all from the shadows. As the rumors spread, Marco's reputation began to falter. Sales at the vineyard dropped significantly, and I could see the panic set in. I reveled in the thought of him pacing his office, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. I imagined the conversations he had with his staff, the frantic calls to suppliers, and the mounting pressure to salvage his business. But I wasn't finished yet. I needed to ensure that the damage was irreversible. I decided to push further, to escalate the situation. I began attending town hall meetings where Marco was scheduled to speak. I positioned myself strategically in the audience, ready to ask pointed questions about the quality of his wine and the rumors circulating in the community. At one such meeting, I stood up, my heart racing as I addressed the crowd. "Marco, can you explain why so many people are questioning the quality of your wine? There have been serious allegations about your practices. How do you respond to that?" The room fell silent, and I could see the sweat bead on Marco's forehead. He stammered through an attempt at a defense, but I could sense the cracks in his composure. The audience was captivated, and I knew I had struck a significant blow. As I left the meeting, a sense of exhilaration washed over me. I was on the brink of achieving my goal, but the weight of my actions was starting to bear down on me. I felt like a puppet master, pulling strings and watching as chaos unfolded. I had become a villain in my own story, and I was no longer sure if I could control the outcome. The thrill of revenge was intoxicating, but I also felt a growing sense of unease. What would happen when the dust settled? Would I be left with just the hollow victory of seeing Marco's downfall? With these thoughts swirling in my mind, I prepared for the final phase of my plan. I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. As I pushed forward with my plan, the consequences of my actions began to unfold in ways I had not anticipated. The rumors about Marco's vineyard had taken on a life of their own, spreading through the community like wildfire. The whispers grew louder, and soon they transformed into full-blown accusations. It wasn't just his reputation that was at stake. It was his livelihood, his passion, and everything he had worked for. One evening, as I sat in my living room, I received a call from Mark. "You need to see this," he said, his voice tense. I turned on the news to see a segment featuring Marco, his face a mask of distress as he defended himself against the allegations that had surfaced. The reporter spoke of dwindling sales and a growing distrust among customers. I felt a rush of satisfaction wash over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by an unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. As the days passed, I watched Marco's empire crumble. The vineyard, once a thriving business, began to suffer financially. Customers who had once flocked to his tastings were now turning their backs, and I could see the desperation in his eyes during public appearances. I had achieved what I set out to do, but in the process, I had unwittingly become a catalyst for something much larger than I had intended. One afternoon, I ran into Sophia at the grocery store. She was visibly shaken, her eyes red from crying. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. I felt a rush of anger rise within me. What could she possibly say that would change anything? But I nodded, and we stepped outside to the parking lot where the air was thick with tension. "Have you seen what's happening to Marco?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart racing. "You have to stop this," she pleaded, her eyes searching mine for understanding. "This isn't just hurting him, it's hurting everyone connected to the vineyard. I can't stand by and watch you destroy a man's life." I felt a surge of resentment at her words. "He destroyed my life first," I shot back, my voice rising. "He took you from me, Sophia. You think I'm the villain. Here, you think I'm the one who's wrong." Her expression softened, and I could see the pain in her eyes. "I know what I did was wrong, but this isn't the answer. You're becoming a person I don't recognize. You're letting this consume you." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I had been so focused on revenge that I had lost sight of who I was. I had become obsessed with Marco's downfall, but at what cost? I felt a flicker of doubt as I considered the lives I was affecting. I was no longer just a scorned husband. I was an agent of chaos, and the ramifications of my actions were spiraling out of control. That night, I lay in bed, tossing and turning as I replayed the confrontation with Sophia in my mind. I thought about Marco, the man I had once viewed as a rival, now a victim of my wrath. I had wanted to expose him, to make him suffer, but I hadn't considered the collateral damage. I was haunted by images of his vineyard, the workers who depended on him, and the community that rallied around him. As the days turned into weeks, I watched as Marco's world continued to unravel. He was forced to lay off staff, and the vineyard that had once been a source of pride became a symbol of failure. I could see the toll it took on him. He looked older, more haggard, and I felt a pang of guilt each time I saw him on the news, defending his integrity against mounting accusations. In a moment of weakness, I reached out to one of the former employees I had spoken to earlier, a woman named Lisa who had left Marco's employ due to the alleged poor working conditions. I had fed her stories in an attempt to further my agenda, but now I found myself questioning the morality of my actions. "Are you okay with what's happening?" I asked her, my voice trembling. She paused, and I could hear the pain in her voice. "I just wanted to speak the truth about what I experienced. I never wanted to ruin someone's life." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I realized I had manipulated her pain for my own gain, and it left me feeling hollow. That night, I confronted Sophia again, this time with a different mindset. "I can't keep doing this," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I thought I would feel better watching him suffer, but all I feel is emptiness. I didn't want to become this person." Sophia reached for my hand, her eyes filled with compassion. "It's not too late to stop. You can still make things right. You have the power to change the narrative." Her words ignited a flicker of hope within me. I realized that I had the choice to take a different path, one that didn't involve destruction. I needed to confront my own demons and find a way to heal, not just for myself, but for everyone affected by my actions. The next day, I made a decision. I would reach out to Marco, not to gloat or to continue my campaign, but to apologize. I needed him to know that I was aware of the consequences of my actions and that I was ready to take responsibility. It was a daunting prospect, but I knew it was the only way to begin to heal the wounds I had inflicted. As I prepared to meet him, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. I was ready to face the consequences of my actions, to confront the man I had wronged, and perhaps, in doing so, find a way to reclaim my own sense of integrity. The day I decided to confront Marco felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, ready to leap into the unknown. I had spent the night tossing and turning, rehearsing what I would say, how I would approach him. I knew that this meeting could either lead to reconciliation or further conflict, but I had to take that risk. I couldn't continue living with the weight of my actions hanging over me. I drove to the vineyard, the familiar landscape now tinged with a sense of foreboding. The once thriving estate looked weary. The vines that had flourished under Marco's care now appeared neglected. As I parked my car and stepped out, I could feel my heart racing. This was the moment of truth. Marco was in his office when I arrived, and I could see the tension etched across his face. He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes as I entered. "Daniel," he said, his tone cautious. "What brings you here?" "I need to talk," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. I could see the mistrust in his eyes, and I didn't blame him. I had been the architect of his downfall, and now I was asking for a conversation. He gestured for me to sit, and I took a deep breath, preparing to lay my soul bare. "I came here to apologize," I began, the words tumbling out. "I let my anger and pain drive me to destroy you. I wanted revenge for what you did to me, but I didn't consider the impact it would have on your life, on your business, and on the people who depend on you." Marco remained silent, his expression unreadable. I could feel the weight of my confession hanging in the air, and I pressed on. "I was blind to the consequences of my actions. I thought I could reclaim my dignity through your suffering, but all I did was become someone I despised. I'm sorry." He finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "You've caused a lot of damage, Daniel. It's not just my business, it's the lives of everyone who works here. I've lost employees and my reputation is in tatters." I nodded, fully aware of the gravity of my actions. "I understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to tell you that I recognize the harm I've done. I want to make it right if I can." Marco studied me for a long moment, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "You think an apology can fix this? You think you can just walk in here and make everything okay?" I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. "No, I know it won't fix everything, but I want to help. I want to help you rebuild your reputation, to undo some of the damage. I've started to realize that revenge didn't heal me. It only deepened my own wounds." The tension in the room was palpable as Marco considered my offer. After what felt like an eternity, he finally sighed. "Rebuilding trust takes time and it won't be easy, but if you're serious about wanting to help, I'll consider it." As we discussed possible ways I could assist him, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was a solution to all our problems, but it was a step in the right direction. I was no longer the vengeful husband. I was a man seeking redemption. In the weeks that followed, I dedicated myself to helping Marco restore his vineyard's reputation. I reached out to the people I had spread rumors to, admitting my role in the chaos and urging them to reconsider their opinions. I worked alongside Marco to promote the vineyard, organizing events that highlighted the quality of his wine and the dedication of his staff. It was a long and arduous process, but slowly, I began to see the fruits of our labor. The community started to rally around Marco again, and I felt a growing sense of pride in being part of that transformation. I realized that by helping him, I was also healing my own wounds. Sophia watched from a distance, her expression a mix of admiration and surprise. I had expected her to criticize my involvement, but instead, she seemed to see a glimmer of the man she had fallen in love with. We began to reconnect, and through our shared experiences, we started to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. As I stood in the vineyard one evening, watching the sun set over the vines, I reflected on the journey I had undertaken. I had been consumed by anger and revenge, but through the process of making amends, I had discovered something far more valuable: the power of forgiveness and the strength of humility. The experience had changed me in ways I could never have imagined. I learned that love and trust are fragile, easily broken, but not impossible to mend. I had walked a dark path, but I had emerged with a deeper understanding of myself and the complexities of human relationships. In the end, I realized that revenge had only led me to a deeper pain, while seeking redemption had opened the door to healing. I had transformed from a man driven by anger to one committed to making things right. Life is unpredictable, and the choices we make can lead us down unforeseen paths. But as I stood there, surrounded by the beauty of the vineyard, I knew I had chosen the right one. In that moment, I found solace in the understanding that true strength lies not in revenge, but in the ability to forgive, to heal, and to rise again. And with that realization, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was time to move forward, free from the shackles of my past.